Big distinction here is the accumulation stage of life where you're working, saving, building, adding assets, and then decumulation. You go from no longer working and saving, but now retired and spending, using your portfolio. Very different planning considerations, things to consider, different knowledge base like Social Security.
One is related to really a comment on Rosie's case study. I don't know how much you tracked, the original retirement plan live with Rosie and then the update, but we definitely have some a lot of feedback on this one. This feedback, and it comes from somebody that's anonymous. They didn't share their name. I was very captivated by your latest podcast with the conversation with Rosie. I can definitely relate to her disappointment with a financial advisor, as I have had several bad experiences with such folks. Also, it seems like I learn a lot more from retirees that are not as well off and have to prioritize decision making. Thanks so much for the broadcast and the guidance. But I thought it might be interesting to take a moment here to talk about experiences with financial advisors. And it's almost, the old attorney jokes about, the jokes about attorneys. It feels like financial advisors have a good reputation that comes to jokes or bad experiences. How does somebody navigate that? I think you would concur. Yeah, there probably is a lot of that.
It's hard. I just coincidentally did a podcast with someone else on my podcast where he's a real person, not an advisor. And he was discussing the same thing, how it was challenging for him to filter through the noise and all the terms and labels and people out there who call themselves advisors or financial professionals or what have you. And he's a very knowledgeable guy. And he jokingly said, I should write a book about this for the average consumer, how they can help find a good advisor for them. And I stopped him. I was like, that's not a joke. Like, you should. I'm going to hold you to that. I think that's a fantastic idea. It would mean a lot to come from someone who's done it, a consumer who's done it. And I'd be willing to help them out with however I can. So anyway, I fully recognize it's hard. An advisor is not an advisor is not an advisor. They're not all created equally. You should not pick one simply because he was referred by someone or happens to be local, or is someone from a place of worship or something. I don't like equating advisors to doctors. I think the analogies break and aren't applicable a lot of times, but at a high level, I think it makes sense here. Think about like doctors. Just because someone's a doctor doesn't mean they can do heart surgery on you, or do reconstructive foot surgery, or whatever, be a specialist in your kidneys. Advisors are sort of similar. They're not all the same. There's generalists and there's folks that intentionally specialize in certain things. Big distinction here is the accumulation stage of life where you're working, saving, building, adding assets, and then decumulation. You go from no longer working and saving, but now retired and spending, using your portfolio. Very different planning considerations, things to consider, different knowledge base like Social Security is sort of a cornerstone of a good decumulation plan. A lot of advisors who just focus on helping folks accumulate don't know much about Social Security beyond some basic talking points. So how does someone know how to find that? It's hard. And you and I have chatted about this, and we kicked around ideas to try to put together a list of resources or helpful hints. It's knowing that they're not all created equal. It's hoping other folks who know what they're doing and have gone through this journey that you can lean on to ask them. It's finding good content sources, be it your podcast, my podcast. There's plenty of blogs, YouTube channels, Facebook groups out there. Some of it's noise and sales, but a lot of it, you hang out long enough, you'll get a feel for what's genuine, good information versus what's just people trying to sell you something. And eventually you sort of soak it up and pick up what you need to know and what can help you find one. I feel like this isn't great because it's not really like tangible, here's what you should do, but I think that's the honestness behind how difficult it is to find someone good and sift through all the junk.
It's a messy field, and it's a sales field at its core. I do agree that I think the analogy of a generalist versus specialist does hold, right? And a retirement planner is very different than a generalist financial planner. And yes, we have a resource of how to interview and search these out that we can share in 6 Shot Saturday that at least gives you a framework to interview. And I'm guessing you would agree with me on this, Andy. When it comes to retirement planning, the importance of investment decisions, although they're important, I don't want to underplay them, in the levers that you have in your life to impact your plan, it becomes a much smaller lever compared to tax management, cash flow management, etc. So we'll share that resource. A lot of it comes down to the question behind the question of asking the follow-up questions, I think, Andy, on everybody's going to talk about retirement planning because that is where all the money is from a financial advisory perspective, right? So everybody's going to talk about financial planning and retirement planning. But I would argue, at least in my experience, very few have really detailed, thought out processes beyond the talking point. So they're not very deep on their process for how they think through things. And just asking follow-up questions when they start talking about their process, I think can help weed out some of that shallowness that exists.
Yeah. And this is where you need a basic level of knowledge. So, for example, retirement-specific planning things are like one of the questions we'll talk about soon. Medicare IRMA or premium surcharges, Roth conversions, Social Security claiming strategies, taxability of pensions, what have you. These are all things specific to retirement. If you ask a prospective advisor questions about Medicare IRMA, about Roth conversions, about Social Security, about pensions, and they don't know the answer, or they give you some generic, doesn't sound like they're talking about answer, they're clearly not a retirement-focused planner, even though they may say they are.